Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a journey through the life and, well, really multifaceted legacy of Napoleon Bonaparte.
Yeah, and our main sort of lens for this is the Vietnamese Wikipedia page about him. It actually pulls together his remarkable story in a really compelling way.
Right. So our goal isn't just, listing dates and battles.
Exactly. We want to dig into the core insights, how he rose so dramatically, the way he ruled, those big reforms he pushed through.
And his impact, right, the sort of ripples he left behind. We want to give you a curated guide, something in depth, but, without needing a history degree overnight.
Absolutely. And it's worth remembering, Napoleon's life, it's been looked at from so many angles. There's just a mountain of material out there.
So what we're doing here is trying to weave together some key threads from that huge record, give you a focused look at this, well, pivotal figure. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Where else?
Right. So Napoleon Bonaparte, born Napoleone Bonaparte, August 15, 1769, in Ajaccio, Corsica.
And the timing is interesting there, isn't it?
Yeah, because Corsica had only just been handed over to France by Genoa, like the year before. So he's born into this Italian heritage on an island that's suddenly French.
And his family background sounds quite significant, too.
Definitely. Second of 8 kids. His dad, Carlo Bonaparte, he was actually a Corsican representative at Louis XVI court, so some political standing there.
And his mother, Letizia Romolino.
Yeah, she's always described as this really strong influence, especially when he was young.
Okay, so this background gave him, well, access to education.
It did. January 1779, he goes off to a religious school in Autun, mainly to learn French, which apparently he struggled with at first.
Yeah.
Then in May, he gets into a military academy, Brienne-le-Château.
And you can sort of picture this young Corsican kid, right?
Yeah.
New language, new culture. The sources say he got teased a bit for his accent, his spelling.
Yeah, sounds like it. But it seems like that just made him buckle down, focus really hard on his studies, particularly maths, history, geography.
It's interesting how these early details sometimes hint at things to come.
Well, yeah, apparently one supervisor even thought he'd make a good sailor.
A sailor. Wow. Imagine that alternate history.
Right. But that idea faded when he got into the really prestigious École Militaire in Paris. He specialized in artillery there.
So artillery it was, not the Navy. And circumstances played a role, too. His father died.
That's right, which meant the family finances took a hit. So he had to cram this 2-year course into just 1 year.
Incredible pressure.
Yeah, and he was the first Corsican ever to graduate from there. And guess who examined him?
Who?
Pierre-Simon Laplace, the famous mathematician and astronomer.
No kidding. Wow. Okay, so even before he's a famous general, you see these, like, nationalist feelings emerging.
Yeah, Corsican nationalism. Back in 1789, he wrote this letter to Pasquale Paoli, basically lamenting how France had, subjugated Corsica.
That's fascinating, considering who he becomes later. Emperor of France.
It really is. And those early years of the French Revolution, he spent a lot of time back in Corsica, caught up in the middle of this complex fight.
Right, you had the royalists, the revolutionaries backing Paris, and then the Corsican nationalists wanting independence. Three-way struggle.
Exactly. And he sided with the Jacobins, the more radical, centralized revolutionaries. Even became a lieutenant colonel in the Corsican militia.
But he wasn't exactly a model soldier at this point. Overstaying leave, leading riots.
Huh. Yeah, seems like it. He led a riot against French troops in Corsica. But despite all that, July 1792, he gets promoted to captain in the regular French army.
Suggests they saw something in him, right? Some potential, despite the rule bending.
Must have. But his vision for Corsica didn't align with everyone's. He clashed pretty hard with Paoli, who really wanted Corsica to break away from France completely.
And that disagreement had real consequences.
Big time. It led to a complete split. And by June 1793, the whole Bonaparte family basically had to flee Corsica for mainland France.
Okay, so that move to the mainland feels like a huge turning point.
It really is. That early Corsican nationalism kind of fades into the background. Now, his focus is all on his career in the French military and, the chaos unfolding in France itself.
And it doesn't take long for a major opportunity to pop up.
Not at all. The Siege of Toulon, 1793. This was his first real chance to shine on a bigger stage.
And he wrote that pamphlet, didn't he? The Super de Beaucaire. Pro-Republican.
Yeah, and that got him noticed by Augustin Robespierre, Maximilian's brother. That connection turned out to be, well, pretty important.
So he gets appointed artillery commander at Toulon. The city was held by the British and royalists.
Exactly. With support from another Corsican, Salicetti. And Napoleon's plan for the artillery, it was decisive. He didn't just scatter the cannons, he concentrated their fire. Really innovative for the time.
Breaking through their defenses, that makes sense.
Yeah, it worked. Toulon fell to the Republicans. And off the back of that success, he comes up with another effective plan for the Sorgio campaign in '94.
Okay, what was that?
Basically, a strategic move into the Italian Riviera. It outflanked the Austrian Sardinian forces, let the French capture key coastal towns, the Tenda Pass.
Showing real strategic thinking.
Definitely. He even got sent on a mission to Genoa by Augustin Robespierre. So his stock was clearly rising within the revolutionary government.
But France during the revolution, I mean, things changed fast, didn't they? The political winds shifted constantly.
Oh, incredibly volatile.
Yeah.
So after the Thermidorian reaction, it's July '94, when Robespierre falls, the reign of terror ends. Napoleon comes under suspicion.
Right.
Because of his links to the Robespierres.
Right. He was even under house arrest for a bit.
Briefly, yeah. But, his military talent was just too obvious to ignore for long.
Yeah.
Cut to October 1795, there's a royalist uprising in Paris against the National Convention.
The government at the time.
Right. And Paul Barras, a key figure from the Thermidorian side, he remembers Napoleon's success at Toulon. So he puts him in charge of defending the convention right there at the Tuileries Palace.
High stakes. This is the 13 Vendémiaire event.
That's the one. And again, it's about the artillery. Napoleon directs Joachim Murat, later one of his marshals, to grab the cannons. He sets them up strategically.
And just blasts the royalists.
Pretty much. It was brutal. About 1,300 royalists killed.
Yeah.
But it worked. The convention survived.
And that really put him on the map, didn't it?
Absolutely catapulted him.
Yeah.
Suddenly, he's got fame, money, powerful friends, gets promoted fast, Major General Commander of the Army of the Interior, which was a big deal.
Huge power base.
Yeah. And then, soon after, he gets the command he really wanted, the Army of Italy.
And right in the middle of all this professional upheaval, his personal life changes too.
Right. He breaks off an engagement to Desiree Clary, who later married another of his marshals, Bernadotte, and became Queen of Sweden, believe it or not.
Wow. Small world.
Hasn't it? Anyway, he breaks that off and marries Josephine de Beauharnais. That was March 9th, 1796.
So in just a few years, he goes from relative unknown to, well, a major player. Military commander, political influence married into society.
Yeah, the stage was definitely set for what came next.
The Italian campaign.
Literally 2 days after his wedding, he's off to take command of the Army of Italy. And that first Italian campaign, 96 to 97, it was just stunning.
A string of victories, right? Against the Austrians, the Sardinians.
Unbelievable victories. Lodi, Arcole, they conquered papal territories. His military genius was just on full display.
How so? What was he doing differently?
Well, he wasn't just sticking to the old rule book. He used artillery as this mobile, concentrated force. He was a master of deception, concentrating his troops at the crucial point, at the crucial time.
Like that quote about learning nothing new after 60 battles, comparing himself to Caesar.
Exactly. He perfected things like the flanking maneuver, the mouvement tenai, the pincer movement. He had this knack for seeing the weak spot in the enemy line and just hitting it hard.
And the results speak for themselves.
Oh, yeah. The numbers are crazy. 150,000 prisoners, 540 cannons, 170 flags captured. Just phenomenal.
So after Italy, his ambitions get even bigger, looking beyond Europe.
Definitely. The Egyptian expedition, 1798-99, that was about hitting Britain where it hurt their interests in India, disrupting trade routes.
He actually told the Directory, the government, back then he'd link up with Indian princes to fight the British.
He did. Big promises.
Yeah.
But there was also this, fascination with Egypt's ancient history driving it too. It wasn't just military.
Right. The scientists, that's a key part of it.
A huge part. He took 167 scientists and scholars, and their work was groundbreaking. They found the Rosetta Stone.
Which unlocked hieroglyphs.
Exactly. And they produced that massive work, the Description de l'Egypte, a huge survey of Egyptian culture, history, everything. Oh, and they grabbed Malta on the way there too.
But the actual military campaign in Egypt? That didn't go so smoothly.
No, it hit some major snags. They landed in Alexandria, won the Battle of the Pyramids against the Mamluk sure.
Yeah.
But then Admiral Nelson and the British fleet show up.
Battle of the Nile.
Right. Destroys the French fleet, cuts Napoleon's army off from France. Huge blow to their plans in the Mediterranean.
And things were tough on the ground, too. Uprisings.
Constant uprisings. Then they pushed into Ottoman Damascus, modern Syria and Palestine. Took some coastal cities. Arish, Gaza, Jaffa.
But Jaffa, there was that massacre, wasn't there?
Yeah, a really controversial, dark moment.
Right.
Thousands of defenders killed after surrendering. And ultimately, they couldn't take Acre. a key strategic city.
So they had to retreat back to Egypt.
Had to, though they did manage to beat an Ottoman landing force at the Battle of Abu Qir. But overall, the strategic goals, not achieved.
Yet, when he gets back to France in November 99, the timing couldn't be better for him politically.
Perfect timing. France was unstable, the Directory was weak, so he teams up with Sieyès and Ducos, stages the coup of 18 Brumaire,
Dissolves the Directory, sets up the consulate.
with himself as first consul. Basically, he seized power.
And that kicks off a whole new phase, the consulate, 1799 to 1804.
Yeah, and now he's focused on consolidating power, stabilizing France. He pushes through a lot of reforms. On the diplomatic front, he negotiates the Treaty of Luneville with Austria in 1801.
Which confirmed French gains.
Confirmed and expanded them. It really shook up the old Holy Roman Empire, led to that German mediatization thing, restructuring German states. He also managed a temporary peace with Britain, the Peace of Amiens in 1802, a brief pause in the fighting.
But not everything was a success story during the consulate. Haiti, for instance.
No, definitely not. The French efforts to crush the Haitian Revolution failed. Haiti won its independence, a major defeat for France, and Napoleon made the decision very controversial to bring back slavery in the French colonies in 1802, undoing earlier revolutionary laws.
A real stain on his record.
Absolutely. And facing money troubles and the likelihood of war with Britain starting up again, he makes another huge decision.
The Louisiana Purchase.
Sells the massive Louisiana Territory to the United States. Changed the map of North America forever.
And all this time, he's tightening his grip on power in France.
Relentlessly.
Yeah.
In 1804, there's this plot against his life, real or maybe exaggerated, who knows, but he uses it.
He uses it how?
As justification. He argues France needs a hereditary monarchy for stability. Better than risking the Bourbons coming back.
Yeah.
The Senate, mostly doing what he wanted, asks him to become emperor.
And he accepts.
Oh, he accepts. December 2nd, 1804. Notre Dame Cathedral, big ceremony. Pope Pius VII is there, but Napoleon takes the crown and puts it on his own head, then crowns Josephine Empress.
That famous story about Beethoven tearing up the dedication on his Third Symphony, the Eroica.
Yeah, apparently Beethoven was furious. He'd admired Napoleon as a revolutionary figure, but the emperor thing, that was too much for him.
The powerful symbol of that shift.
Definitely. And the next year, 1805, he goes to Milan and crowns himself king of Italy, too. And he creates the marshals of the empire. His top generals rewarded, kept loyal, setting the stage for, well, for dominating Europe.
Which leads us straight into the Napoleonic Wars proper. The War of the Third Coalition, 1805, Britain, Austria, Russia against him.
Right. He has to ditch his plan to invade Britain. The Royal Navy's too strong, so instead he swings his army east. The Ulm campaign. Astonishingly fast.
He encircled a whole Austrian army.
Yeah, captured a huge Austrian force. Just brilliant maneuvering. But then comes the bad news.
Trafalgar.
Yeah. Nelson smashes the combined French and Spanish fleet. Britain owns the seas after that, no question.
But on land, just 6 weeks later.
Austerlitz, December 1805, maybe his greatest victory ever. Crushes the combined Austrian and Russian armies.
And the consequences were huge.
Enormous. The Holy Roman Empire, this ancient entity in Central Europe, dissolved. He creates the Confederation of the Rhine-Journal states, basically under his protection. He called Austerlitz the finest battle I have ever fought. You can see why.
Even with the setback in Egypt, he's still playing the geopolitical game in the Middle East, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. He's trying to build alliances against Russia, mainly. Sends General Sebastiani to the Ottoman Empire, and after Austerlitz, the Ottoman Sultan, Selim III, he actually recognizes Napoleon as emperor, allies with France, and declares war on Russia and Britain.
Wow. And Persia, too.
There was a Franco-Persian alliance for a couple of years, 1807 to 1809, again, aimed at Russia and Britain. But it fell apart when Napoleon decided to ally with Russia later on. Shows how pragmatic, or maybe cynical, his diplomacy could be.
Okay, so next up, the Fourth Coalition. 1806, 1807. Prussia jumps in this time.
Prussia and Russia. Big mistake for Prussia. Napoleon just rolls over them at the battles of Jena and Auerstedt in October 1806. Swift, decisive.
Then he faces the Russians.
Yeah, there's a really bloody, horrible battle at Eylau in the winter. Kind of inconclusive. But then, June 1807, he decisively beats the Russians at Friedland.
Which leads to the treaties of Tilsit.
Right. Signed on a raft in the middle of a river. Very dramatic. With Russia and Prussia. Basically divides Europe up. A French sphere and a Russian sphere. Prussia gets hammered, loses a ton of territory.
And starts putting his family on thrones.
Yeah. His brother Jerome becomes king of Westphalia, this new kingdom carved out of German lands. And he creates the Duchy of Warsaw in Polish territory, giving the Poles hope, but keeping it under French control.
It seems like he's unstoppable, even when Austria tries again in 1809, the Fifth Coalition.
He beats them too. The Battle of Wagram, it was a tough fight, but another French victory. By this point, his control over continental Europe looks almost total.
Almost. But things start to unravel, don't they? Russian becomes a problem.
Yeah, the alliance forged at Tilsit starts breaking down. Tsar Alexander I, he's not happy with the continental system.
Napoleon's economic blockade against Britain,
Yeah,
trying to strangle their trade.
exactly. Russia wasn't sticking to it rigidly enough for Napoleon's liking. That, plus other tensions. It leads to the invasion of Russia in 1812. Just a catastrophic decision.
The scale of that invasion, the Grande Armée, it was massive.
Unprecedented. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from all over Europe. But the Russians, they had a smart strategy under Kutuzov.
Avoid a big battle, retreat, and burn everything.
Scorched earth. Made it incredibly hard for the French to find supplies. They needed constant foraging for this enormous army.
But there was one huge battle, right? Borodino.
Borodino, yeah. Absolutely horrific fighting. Massive casualties on both sides. Napoleon technically won in that the Russians retreated, but it wasn't the decisive, army-destroying victory he needed.
He called it the most terrible of all my battles.
He did. Said the French deserved victory, but the Russians proved invincible. Really captures the brutality and the Russian resilience.
So the French reach Moscow.
They do, but it's largely empty. And then it starts burning. Whether deliberately set by the Russians or accidental fires getting out of control, the result is Moscow is devastated. No shelter, no supplies.
And then came the retreat.
The retreat was the real disaster through the brutal Russian winter. Cold, starvation, disease, constant attacks by Russian partisans and Cossacks. The Grande Armée just disintegrated.
How many made it back?
Only a tiny fraction of the main force that went in. Tens of thousands, maybe, out of well over 500,000. Just catastrophic losses.
And that defeat, it changed everything in Europe.
Completely changed the game. Suddenly, Napoleon looked vulnerable. It emboldened all his enemies. So Prussia, Austria, Sweden, Russia, Britain, Spain, Portugal, they all pile in. The Sixth Coalition, 1813, 1814.
He still fights back, though, wins some battles.
Yeah, he's still a brilliant general. He wins some initial victories like at Dresden, but the Allies just have overwhelming numbers now. And then comes the Battle of Leipzig.
The Battle of Nations.
Exactly, October 1813. Huge battle, maybe the largest in European history up to that point. Napoleon is decisively defeated. Huge casualties on both sides, something like 90,000.
So he has to retreat back into France itself.
Yes, with a much smaller, exhausted army. The Allies are pushing in from all sides. He pulls off some tactical masterpieces in the 6 Days Campaign in early 1814, fighting brilliantly against the odds.
But it's not enough.
Not enough to stop the tide. The Allies capture Paris in March 1814.
And his own marshals turn against him.
That's the final straw. They basically tell him it's over. He's forced to abdicate. April 4th, 1814.
And the Allies send him into exile.
Yeah, to Elba, a small island off the coast of Italy. They probably thought that was the end of it.
But it wasn't.
Not even close. February 1815. He escapes Elba, lands back in France.
Which must have sent shockwaves across Europe.
Total panic. Louis VIII, the Bourbon king the Allies had put back on the throne, he flees Paris. Napoleon marches back in triumph. This whole period is the 100 Days.
But the Allies react immediately.
Instantly. They form the 7th Coalition. No messing around this time. They're determined to stop him for good.
Which leads to
Waterloo.
Yeah.
June 1815, near Brussels. Napoleon faces a combined British, Dutch, and German army under the Duke of Wellington, and the Prussians under Blücher arriving later in the day.
And this time he's defeated. Decisively.
Decisively. It was a close-run thing, as Wellington said, but the Allies held, the Prussians arrived, and the French army was routed. That was the real end of his military career.
So a second exile. And this time, they weren't taking any chances.
No way. The British exiled him to St. Helena, this tiny, remote island in the middle of the South Atlantic, thousands of miles from anywhere, heavily guarded.
And he stayed there until he died.
Yeah, he died there on May 5th, 1821. He was only 51.
There's always been debate about how he died, hasn't there?
Oh, yeah, lots of theories. The official autopsy said stomach cancer. His father died of that, too, so it seemed plausible.
But then the arsenic poisoning theory came up, based on hair samples.
Exactly. Later analysis found high levels of arsenic in strands of his hair, and his body was apparently quite well preserved when they exhumed it later, which could be a sign of arsenic.
So was he poisoned?
Well, modern research mostly leans back towards stomach cancer. Some studies suggest the arsenic levels might have been high throughout his life, maybe from environmental exposure or even medicines they used back then. It's still debated, but cancer seems the most likely cause now.
He was buried on St. Helena initially.
Yep, in a place called the Willows Valley. But then, in 1840, the French king, Louis Philippe, got permission from the British to bring his remains back to France.
Which must have been a huge event in Paris.
Immense, a massive state funeral, and eventually in 1861 his body was entombed in that huge porphyry sarcophagus under the dome at Les Invalides, a very grand final resting place.
Okay, so beyond the wars and the politics, his legacy, a lot of it is tied up in the reforms he made, right?
Absolutely. His impact within France and the areas France controlled was profound and often lasting. Things like reorganizing higher education, setting up a more efficient tax system, building roads, sewers, practical
The
stuff.
Bank of France?
He founded that, yeah. Still central to France's economy.
Uh-huh.
And the Concordat of 1801 with the Catholic Church, it was huge for restoring stability after the Revolution, tried to de-Christianize France. But it kept the church under state control, which suited him.
And the Légion d'honneur.
Established in 1802. Still France's highest order of merit today, recognizing service to the nation, military or civil.
But the big one, the one everyone knows, is the Napoleonic Code.
The Code Civil. Yeah, that's arguably his most lasting legacy globally. It was a massive overhaul of French civil law. The key principles were clarity, accessibility laws everyone could understand, and equality before the law.
And it spread far beyond France.
Hugely influential. It was adopted or heavily influenced legal systems across Europe, Latin America, parts of the Middle East. Its structure and principles still form the basis of law in many, many countries.
That historian Langeviche called it a revolutionary project.
Yeah, he argued it helped create a more bourgeois middle-class society, especially in Germany, and sped up the end of feudalism. It also indirectly fueled nationalism in places like Italy and Germany by providing a common legal framework.
What about the metric system? Did he invent that?
He didn't invent it, the revolutionaries did, officially adopted in 1799. But his rule was crucial for making it stick in France and spreading it to territories France controlled. He was a strong supporter.
He introduced some kind of compromise system for a while.
Right, the measures used Wells in 1812. It tried to blend traditional units with metric standards.
Yeah.
Didn't totally work, but it probably helped ease the transition. Ultimately, his push was key to the metric system becoming dominant in Europe later in the 19th century.
How did he approach religion generally? You mentioned the Concordat.
His view was very pragmatic. He wasn't conventionally religious himself, more of a deist probably, but he saw organized religion, especially Catholicism in France, as vital for social order. Keep the people content, maintain stability.
So the Concordat restored ties with the Pope, but it was really about state control.
Pretty much. It gave Napoleon a lot of political influence over the church. He also brought in the Organic Articles, which further defined the state's role in religious affairs.
But he was also known for extending rights to minorities, Jews, Protestants.
Yes, that's a really significant aspect. In areas under his control, he often granted rights to Jews and Protestants in Catholic regions, and Catholics in Protestant ones. Things like property rights, freedom of worship, access to jobs.
He famously said he wouldn't force Jews out of France, saw them as equal citizens.
He did. He believed integrating them would strengthen France. These policies made him quite admired in many Jewish communities at the time, though, predictably, condemned by groups like the Russian Orthodox Church.
His image. He's become such an icon, hasn't he? The hat, the hand in the waistcoat.
Absolutely. A global cultural icon. Represents military genius, political power. That historian Martin van Creveld called him the most competent man who ever lived. High praise.
What about the height thing? Was he actually short?
Not really. That's mostly a myth stemming from propaganda and confusion between French and English inches. He was about 1.7 meters, around 5'7" in English feet. Pretty average for the time.
And the little corporal, le petit caporal.
That was actually a term of endearment from his soldiers, supposedly after the Battle of Lodi. It wasn't an insult.
And Napoleonic complex?
That came much later from the psychologist Alfred Adler. He used Napoleon as an example of someone compensating for perceived inferiority, though, based on the height myth. But the term stuck.
His actual military legacy, beyond the image, what were the key innovations?
He really changed warfare. Using the corps system, self-contained mini-armies was crucial. Integrating mobile artillery reserves that could be concentrated quickly, a more flexible personnel system, promoting based on merit, and really re-emphasizing cavalry's role.
And his focus was on destroying the enemy army.
Yes, annihilation more than just maneuvering for position. But this also meant war became bigger, more destructive, more costly in lives and money, and the political stakes got much higher.
The term Bonapartism still gets used in politics, doesn't it?
It does. In French history, it specifically means wanting to restore the Bonaparte dynasty. But more broadly, it refers to a kind of political style. A strong, centralized state, often led by a charismatic figure who appeals directly to the people, emphasizing national unity, order, maybe a bit authoritarian.
Of course, alongside the admiration, there's always been huge criticism of him.
Oh, absolutely. From his own time onwards, opponents saw him as a tyrant, a usurper who tore up the rulebook of international relations. The sheer number of deaths in his wars is staggering.
And the Haitian Revolution reinstating slavery. Those are major points of criticism.
Huge ethical stains, definitely. He's also accused of institutionalizing plunder-looting art and wealth from conquered lands.
Some people have even compared him to Hitler.
That comparison gets made, but many historians find it deeply problematic. Their ideologies, goals, methods, the nature of their regimes, really fundamentally different in crucial ways. But the criticism remains. The cost of his ambition was immense. France arguably lost power in the long run. The death toll was horrific.
The supporters would argue France was constantly under attack.
Yeah.
That he was defending the revolution's ideals.
That's the counter-argument, yes, that the coalitions were trying to crush France and restore the old order, and he was fighting for France's survival and its revolutionary gains. Public opinion, especially in France, is still really divided about him. Complex figure.
But undeniably influential. The Napoleonic Code's impact alone is massive.
Undeniable. And his impact goes beyond France. Poland, for example.
Yeah.
The Duchy of Warsaw, the legal reforms, ending serfdom there. He left a big mark on Polish identity and development.
Influenced leaders elsewhere, too.
Yeah, figures like Muhammad Ali in Egypt consciously copied some of his administrative and military reforms. And even someone like Hitler, centuries later, clearly admired his military prowess, visiting his tomb after conquering Paris. Shows the enduring, if complicated, power of his image.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered a lot of ground. From his Corsican origins, that incredibly rapid military rise,
through the huge reforms he brought to France and beyond, the sheer scale and impact of the Napoleonic Wars that redrew the map of Europe.
his dramatic fall, exile, that brief return, and then the final exile, and this incredibly complex legacy that we're still grappling with.
Yeah, it really leaves you thinking, doesn't it? And maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Just reflect on that paradox. Here's someone who pushed through genuinely progressive reforms, the Code Civil, for example, but also brought about unimaginable conflict and suffering.
A force for modernization and a source of immense destruction, all wrapped up in one figure.
Exactly. So what parts of his story, his impact, resonate most with you today? And what does that tell us about power, ambition, and how the modern world got to be the way it is? Something to chew on.